Police Minister Bheki Cele is set to release the fourth quarter crime statistics later today. Although there was a decrease in illegal possession of firearm in the last stats, there are still concerns about how easily accessible guns are in this country and how these guns contribute to violent crime. Most of the weapons used in crimes are either stolen from police stations or in fact bought from the illicit market. Let's make sense of this for you now. Bring in Professor Nirmala Gopal, who's from the University of KwaZulu-Natal's Criminology Department. She joins us via our video link this morning. Prof, it's great to see you. Thank you so much indeed for making time. People who work in your space, NGOs who work also in that industry, will be quick to tell you that South Africa's streets are awash with guns, and it's those weapons really that are contributing to things like cash in transit heights, robberies, sometimes assassinations as well. How big of a crisis do you reckon this is?
Good morning, Rufiwe, and good morning to your listeners, and thank you for having me here this morning. I think you correctly point out that I think the majority of citizens in South Africa are concerned about gun violence and guns that are used in the commission of crimes. The illicit market, of course, we all anecdotally understand that there is a huge illicit market, but unfortunately we don't have accurate stats or data to confirm how huge or how wide this illicit market actually is.
Yeah. By the way, Prof, you're speaking to Ayanda. I wonder how much of an issue that becomes then when it comes to actually intervening, right? Because at the very least, you need to be able to quantify the problem so that you know what the appropriate response ought to be. Yes,
absolutely. But I think we all know that, South Africa is a space where it's such a melting pot at the moment, not just with crime. There's a whole lot of socioeconomic issues that we are going through. And our country still has quite a bit of work to do around resolving a whole lot of issues. And I think amongst that is the criminal activities. And what we are not doing at the moment is that we don't have accurate recording systems at the moment. And for as long as we don't have that, I think it will be extremely difficult for us to understand the context of illicit drugs in the commission of crimes, for example.
Yeah. When it comes to how many of these illicit guns are stolen from police, are we able to anecdotally say how many of those guns actually come from police stations, as it were? Because we're able to, I guess, gauge that by how many of the stories make it to the headlines, for instance. But is there any way of gauging whether, for instance, a large proportion of these guns typically are stolen from police?
Yeah, I think one of the things that exists amongst the police is a culture of secrecy and silence. And what happens is that only those that, like you say, only those that come to, that are in the spotlight, that are actually revealed, we are able to understand those ones. But of course, the police would not want to very easily let us know that they are vulnerable as well. I mean, usually people expect the police to be our providers of safety and security, and for police stations to actually be robbed of guns is quite problematic. So I don't think we would ever be able to quantify the number of guns that are actually stolen from police stations. But I think just to add, Ayanda, the fact is that, and this is something we know quite well, is that you have police who are complicit in criminal activities as well. So it's not just guns that are stolen from the police, but it's also police who are complicit and provide or supply criminals with those guns. So I think there's two categories of how those illicit guns actually move from the state, from the government to the criminals.
I wonder to what extent you reckon that might throw into question the credibility of the crime stats we get from police. Because, and you might know this better than I do, is there any other body, for instance, that's able to cross-reference, double-check the statistics and the figures that we receive from the police minister every quarter? Or are we in a situation where we just kind of accept what we're told?
Yeah, unfortunately, we do accept what we're told. And of course, people like myself, criminologists and other researchers, are always skeptical about the crime statistics, largely because of our reporting system and the ability, of course, of SAPS to to get the data that's accurate. Oftentimes when people go to the police stations, there are some forms of crimes that they don't even, they decide that this crime is not a crime. So the statistics will always be questioned, and I think especially by people who have scientific knowledge of how to generate data. But I think also in terms of communities are also skeptical because they are aware of the extent, the nature and extent of crime in their own communities. And when they hear and see these crime statistics, they too are quite skeptical. And I think that augurs really well for our own democracy. The fact that community members themselves are skeptical about such things like crime statistics.
Typically, we have heard in many instances where there's really grotesque crimes committed against, for instance, elderly people or children. Ordinary citizens call for something like the death penalty. But some researchers, again, in your space have been quick to point out that criminals are only put off from committing crime if they feel that the prospects of them being caught is quite high. The sense I'm getting from you is that part of the reasons why we see high crime stats every quarter is because not only are police working with criminals, but criminals in many instances know that there are so many dysfunctional processes that will see them get away without any kind of consequence.
Absolutely. I mean, we look at the case of Senzo Maiwa, for example, and it's 6 or 7 years and we still haven't found the perpetrators. So it's these kind of incidences that continue to feed into the lack of confidence into police, and where criminals now realize that there's a loophole, there's a vulnerability in our police service themselves. But I don't think that the death penalty will help that in any way.
Yeah, speak to us a bit more about that, because I often find that the message gets lost, because in some people's minds, the more severe you are with the punishment, the more of a deterrent, I guess it is, for criminals, but not so.
No, I don't believe it is so, but also remember that we are now in a democracy, and our democracy won't allow us to bring back the death penalty. It is one of the forms of punishment that we got rid of when we introduced the new constitution. But having said that, and I know from the classical school, we did say that let the punishment fit the crime. But I don't think since the classical school we have scientific evidence to show that there's a deterrence, that the harsher your punishment, the more deterrent, the greater it will serve as a deterrent. I think especially in South Africa, if we look at the context, there are a whole lot of factors or dimensions that feed into the commission of crime. And part of that, like I said earlier, would be your social services, unemployment rates, the sense of feeling valued in a country where we've come from such a horrific past, etc. So it has to be a holistic solution and intervention, and not just the criminal justice system in terms of trying to reduce crime rates in South Africa, and especially violent crimes. But I think in terms of the gun, guns being used in crimes, which is so violent really, we need to unpack that and find out why do we have such a high number of violent crimes in South Africa. And that, of course, needs really important research to be done. And I'm not sure whether the will exists in our country to undertake that kind of research.
Yeah. What's that saying? You're often, a train is only as strong as its weakest link. I wonder, even if we were able to sort out all our internal issues in South Africa, whether or not the weaknesses that exist in our neighboring countries may bring about disadvantages, because we know a lot of the time, even in illicit trade of weapons, some of those trade lines cross our borders.
Yeah, of course, I think you're absolutely correct. But increasingly, we've noted that the quantity of illicit guns from our neighboring countries have actually decreased. 30 years ago, 20 years ago, there was a large quantity of guns that were actually coming through those borders, especially Mozambique. But that has actually reduced enormously. So the guns that we are having, the illicit guns, are guns that are circulating from the country, within the country. But also, Ayanda, if I could point out that not all crime is committed by illicit guns. There's a large number, or there's a huge quantity of crimes that's committed with guns that are licensed and owned by people who actually commit those crimes.
Plenty to think about as we look forward to those crime stats. Prof, thanks very much indeed for helping us connect the dots this morning. Appreciate your time. Professor Nirmala Gopal is with UKZN's Criminology Department. Once again, appreciate your insights. Let's stay with the story. Cele and other police officials from the SADC region have also vowed to fight transnational crime in the region, and this was during the Southern African